Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello everyone, and welcome to Work in Progress, the Personal Productivity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I am your host, Joanna. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to Work in Progress. I'm your host, Joanna, and today we are going to be chatting about negotiation stress and how we can use behavioral insights to make negotiations less stressful. So I'd love to welcome back Max Reisner onto the show today. Max was on the show about a year ago now, and we were talking about decision making. So we're going to be in great hands. For those of you who don't remember, Max is an applied behavioral scientist, and he's also the founder of Decision Science. And on a related note for today, he's running masterclasses and courses around negotiation, but we'll dive into that a bit later. Hi, Max. Welcome back.
Hey, Joanna. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, of course. It's a pleasure. I'm excited to get into today's topic. It's something that I haven't talked about before. I haven't talked about negotiations and stress, so that's going to be quite interesting. Now, before we dive into that, could you please tell us a bit more about who you are, what you do, and what you've been up to for the last year?
Sure. Well, so I'm Max. I guess as most people would call me is, as you said, an applied behavioral economist or applied behavioral scientist. Yeah. Which really means that I help organizations understand how people act, how they choose, how they buy certain things and other things not, how they change when they decide to change. And part of this is helping individuals and organizations use these skills in negotiating. And that is because in negotiating, it's very important to understand how people actually make decisions, as we all are rational rather than how they should make decisions. And that's what I've been, pretty much up to in the last years. So very different contexts in the world of negotiating. And I'm just very keen to bring that topic and make it more accessible to more and more people, because I think it's something that we never really taught how to do. But it is important because we're negotiating all the time and everywhere.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like that's such a good point that you make. Like, we don't really know much about negotiating. It's not something that you get taught in school, or it's not necessarily something that's considered a normal life skill. So I'm glad that we get to talk about it and bring more awareness to it. But before we dive into all of that, we have a section called Have You Met Max? So you know what this section's all about. We ask you a few get to know you questions. Hopefully your answers might have changed since the last time we did it, but we'll see how we go. So my first question is, what is your favorite book?
Yeah, I tried to change them, but forgive me if I haven't, because I might have forgotten.
That's okay.
But I guess so I just pick a book that I've read recently, then that's why I make sure it's not the same. So one of really my favorite books turned out is a book called Breath by James Nestor. And that book is all about how we basically evolve from breathing a lot through our noses, and now nowadays a lot more through our mouths. And it's really related to negotiating and sort of public speaking in general as well, because by regulating our breath and by consciously thinking about it and by sort of changing our bad habits to good habits when it comes about breathing, we can really sort of control our emotions and the stress that negotiating brings with it at some point. So yeah, great book, can absolutely recommend.
Brilliant. Thanks for that one. And my next question is, what movie have you enjoyed recently?
I have, as you would know from last time we spoke, my happy place is the ocean. And I love being in the ocean. So one movie I watched, which was actually about the ocean, was My Octopus Teacher.
Okay.
Not sure if you have watched it. It's a Netflix documentary.
No,
and it's
I
great
haven't.
because, it shows how a human can connect with an animal, in that case an octopus, over years. And it's quite emotional. So it's a great movie to watch.
Okay, amazing. I haven't heard of that one, but when you started talking about the ocean, I feel like the first movie that came to mind was The Shape of Water, if you've
Oh, I haven't
heard of
watched
that
that
one.
one.
Oh, okay. It's interesting. It's about, oh, I don't want to spoil it because I will probably spoil it if I try to describe it to you. But it's got to do with like a sea kind of creature, and it's quite interesting. It came out like a while ago though, but yeah, check that one out.
I will.
So my next question is, are you listening to any podcasts at the moment, or do you have any recommendations for us?
I am. There's a few I listen to, and I think generally I try to pick those that just take a little bit longer in duration, like this one, for example. So I love
Yeah.
podcasts that are at least maybe an hour and a half, because it's like just that great pendulum ride. Everything becomes faster. We move faster through our lives, and you know, I don't know, TikTok, Instagram, it's all short videos. It's great to have that pendulum. And the ones that I can recommend are, for example, the Withdrawal podcast, which I think is great, or the Huberman Lab podcast has some great episodes. So yeah, those are great.
Yeah, and that's such a good point as well, because we're so used to like short videos, and I feel like my attention span has gotten a lot shorter because I'm not used to like long content or content that's like longer than 10 seconds.
Oh, same here. I read the other day, I think the average human attention span is now down to 8.25 seconds.
Wow.
That's more or less what the duration of a TikTok video. So that
Yeah.
makes sense, I guess. But yeah, it's just good to consciously slow down some things. And if you can listen to a deep conversation over a longer time, that's great.
Yeah, I love that. Awesome. Well, I've got one more question here for you, and that is, do you have a role model in your life?
I remember that question from last year, and
Yeah.
I think my answer at that point was that I don't have that one role model, but I pick people from my everyday life that really inspire me. Now, one person that I met, so I'm now living, right, last year I was living in Sydney. Now I'm actually living in Margaret River, WA, which is a little bit smaller. And what they have for the past 25 years is a soup kitchen, which a guy named Dave actually founded. And he started that obviously initially, to solve the problem that homeless people don't have access to warm meals. But by now, or for many years already, it's just become that place where the whole community can go to. So, some evenings there would be 200 people lining up and 200 meals given out. It's just everyone. You don't have to be homeless to go there. And I think that really inspired me, because it's, seems to be his sort of life vision. And he's been doing this for 25 years and like really changing, the community in that sense. So I guess he's my, current inspiration / role model. And yeah.
That's really cool. I love that. And I love how, like, as you've moved from Sydney to Margaret River, and now you've got a new role model. I love that, because I feel like life is constantly changing and we meet new people and they inspire us as well. So that's awesome.
Cool. Let's get going.
Great. So let's dive into our questions for today. Now, I just wanted to start off by understanding what negotiations are. So, what do we mean by negotiations, and where would we commonly use them?
Yeah, look, we negotiate all the time and everywhere. And when we talk about negotiations, many people would think about things like salary negotiations or, large union negotiations in newspaper a lot in our days. But really think about the last time you negotiated with, your partner or friend or roommate or whatever, who does the dishes. That's a negotiation as well. Or maybe at work, you are collaborating within a team and you negotiate who does what, who contributes what the deadlines are. So really a negotiation is a way of two people or more coming to an agreement through a conversation. I think that's how you can define a negotiation. And it's much more than what we think sort of, typical negotiations are. So really we negotiate all the time and everywhere. And that's why I think it's so important to actually develop some skills around it to come to a better agreement and better outcome.
Yeah, because when I think of negotiations, I think of like scary business scenarios where you're sitting with like a CEO or someone with like a lot of power and you're trying to negotiate some big deal. But when you put it in that way, like we're constantly negotiating in everyday life, even if it's like the little things, that makes it seem a bit more approachable. And now I want to bring in this idea of stress, because I feel like there would be stressful negotiations that we have to take part in. So, what do we mean by stressful negotiations?
Negotiations are stressful. I guess you just can't you just can't say they aren't. And that's really true for anyone, right? Someone that's pretty experienced negotiator or someone that hasn't really negotiated. If you think about, those sort of once in a lifetime negotiations like buying a house or, buying a car, which is more often like it is just stressful. And that's because, again, we are never really being taught how to do so. And it's kind of similar to presenting, right? I know, or I myself, I used to be a terrible presenter. And, I'm by far still not perfect. But by practicing and by developing some soft skills around it, I became a better presenter because I gained confidence and it was less stressful. And that's the same is really true for negotiations as well. Because we are never really taught how to do so. We're not taught to do so in school, in uni, not really by our parents. We just pick up certain things maybe from some movies or some politicians, how they negotiate. But often those are not great ways how to negotiate anyways. And happy to talk about that later. And that's why negotiations are stressful, because we're doing it without really knowing what we should do. And often that just causes us to not be ourselves, because we think we need to act tough and we think we shouldn't answer any questions because it's going to be used against us, and we shouldn't ask too much because that gives the other party the feeling that we don't know what we are doing. And yeah, this is why stressful negotiations exist. Now, the other part is, when you think about a negotiation, there's always something at stake, right?
Yeah.
Either it's money, sometimes life-changing money. Maybe buy a house. Well, that house you're probably going to pay off if you buy it on a mortgage for the next 30 years. It's a big thing. Of course, we're going to be stressed about it. Of course, we're going to be nervous. Or it's about an opportunity. Maybe we apply for a job, or maybe we raise money with investors for our business. Well, of course, we're going to be stressed about it. Or it's about time. Maybe you ask your boss about, vacation time. I actually am nervous doing that, because I'm like, well, what if not? Now I already got all those plans. So, of course, it's going to be stressful. And, a lot of the time it's about our reputation as well. So because of those two things, because we're never really being taught how to negotiate, and because there's always something at stake, negotiations are stressful.
Yeah. And how can we go about defining a successful negotiation?
Yeah. So maybe I should add, first of all, of course, negotiations are stressful, but there are ways to reduce that stress, right? Similar to presenting, you can develop those soft skills and you're going to gain that confidence, and you're going to be a more, less stressed and better presenter or public speaker. The same is true for negotiating. And success in that context means that in a negotiation, the ideal goal is to create extra value together by coming to an agreement. So think about you and I negotiate, about whatever it is. Well, if we come to an agreement, and that's why we negotiate in the first place, we create some extra value together. And that extra value is then to be split. And, we both win. If you look at the data and ask people what they think a successful negotiation is, one of the themes that always pops up is fairness. People say a successful negotiation is to be treated fair, and some even say to treat the other party fair, which I think is great. And that's what success in a negotiation should look like. It should be, and you hear things like, if you look at the data, well, successful negotiations should be giving a little and getting a little. It should be getting equal proportions. It should be about equity, not only equality. And that's really what fairness is, right? So that's why I think finding out more about negotiations and finding a principled way to treat the other person fairly while being treated fairly is a great way. And that's how success in a negotiation should look like.
Yeah, and I found this interesting quote actually about successful negotiations by Christopher Voss. I'm not sure if you've heard of him before.
I haven't. No, who is he?
I actually haven't heard of him until I looked into it, but he was a former FBI hostage negotiator, and now he's like a CEO, author, and academic. So he has like experience in international crisis and like high stake negotiations. And he says that successful negotiation is not about getting to yes, it's about mastering no and understanding what the path to an agreement is. Is that something you can agree with as well?
100%. I think it's a great quote. And one thing I would even add is successful negotiation is about finding out what the other party wants and give the other party what they want, because then you get what you want. And that really should be the mindset of everyone. I think we are very often thinking about in negotiation, okay, what do we want? How can we get what we want? How can we get there fast? But what we forget about, it is giving a little, right? As you just said in that quote, it is finding out how can I give the other party what they want, because that way I can get what I want. And also kind of part of that quote is, negotiation is not a zero-sum game. If you come to an agreement, both parties win. It shouldn't be that one party wins and one loses and then you have that zero-sum. Actually, if you come to an agreement, both parties win and you can split that extra value. And that is, what that quote means, and also what should be our mindset going into a negotiation. How can I give the other party what they want?
Yeah, and I'm curious, what if it comes to a point where you can't come to an agreement, or one person's getting what they want and the other can't seem to? How do you manage that sort of situation?
Yeah, well, if there is no agreement, then usually it's not like one party wins and one doesn't, because in a negotiation, many people don't realize that neither, is that the power is equal. So if I'm not happy with the outcome, I can always say no, and that way I don't win. Now, I know in reality that might not always be working out, but that's because people do not realize that they have the same power. In a salary negotiation, for example, of course, you're applying maybe at that big enterprise and they, outside of the negotiation, have a lot of power. But really inside that negotiation, otherwise they would have not already made you an offer and you wouldn't be negotiating about the salary. They need you because you can create value for them, and that's usually more than your salary. You can serve clients, and you need them because you need a job. So you have the right to, if you're not happy with the offer or whatever, say no, and that way you can avoid actually a way where you lose and they win. So I guess that's a mindset that would generally probably help you to avoid those kind of situations. But just knowing, hey, you have the equal power, and you have, there is a way to get to an outcome where you win and the other party wins.
And how can we apply behavioral insights to help this negotiation process?
Yes. And so actually one thing I forgot, maybe let me add that to the previous one.
Yeah.
So the reason why, the way the human brain works is we are very bad at doing more than one thing at the same time. That's why, I'm, for example, terrible at multitasking, right? Like focus on one thing and then we want to do another thing and it's just not working out. And that's the same applies to negotiations as well. When we are stressed and overwhelmed, and that can happen in those situations. And you might think, oh, what am I going to do? Should I now say yes to that offer or no? Or, do I need more time? Or how are they going to react if I ask for more time to think about it? Well, in those situations, all our body is doing is trying to reduce that stress and sort of focus on reducing that stress. And that's why our prefrontal cortex, which is actually responsible for rational calm decision making that you would actually need in a negotiation is very inhibited, and it causes you to not being able to make the right decisions. So that's sort of the biological reason why we struggle. And it's similar in a presentation, right? You rehearse, and then you go on stage and suddenly nothing works out as planned. And you're like, why? Like, I have rehearsed. And, it's, if you're nervous, if you're stressed, you're just not yourself. And that's why it's so important to practice for negotiations and try to reduce that stress, because you want to make rational, I shouldn't actually say rational, but you want to make good and effective decisions in that negotiations, which is often ad hoc. That to that point. And by the way, now that we're here, there's one great technique, which, so a little shout out, there's a book called Winning the Room by Jonathan Pease. And JP is actually a colleague of mine at the Unity. And he wrote a book about how you can improve your public speaking skills. And one of the tools he talks about is called tied loose. And what it means is you learn your content as tight as possible. You rehearse, you make notes, you follow those notes. And the night before your presentation, you throw away those notes. And things might not come out the exact same way and in a different order, and you might forget some things. But that's not the point. You're going to be naturally less stressed. You're going to be naturally less nervous and more confident. And that's, another way to reduce that stress before negotiation is just going into a negotiation almost like with a script. Do your research. If it's about a salary negotiation, know what, might be a range that you can earn based on your experience, based on similar roles. And that is really a great way to avoid that multitasking, sort of irrational ad hoc decision making, because you are already going to be more confident. You're not feeling like you're actually multitasking because you have rehearsed it a lot before, you have done your research, and that reduces the stress. So yeah, I think I just wanted to get that sort of biological reason out there, so we actually understand why we are stressed in whether it's a presentation or a negotiation.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like when you're in those moments and you are stressed, it's really hard to figure it out, because like you said, you can prepare for it, you can rehearse, and then you get up on stage and then it all doesn't go to plan. So understanding it is very important.
Yeah. And on that point, I don't think it is very, it's not a problem if things don't go to plan and if it doesn't come out in the exact same way as you rehearsed, because that just makes you authentic and likable. And we know from research that people like to do business with people that they like and that they think are authentic. So if you come into that room negotiating and almost reading off your script, that can actually backfire as well. So it's not a bad thing to be a little bit nervous. I think we call it positive stress, right? Because it makes you authentic, it makes you likable, it makes you a human in the end of the day. We should not always see that as a weakness. I know we do, because we watch those tough negotiators on TV and in TV shows, or politicians. But that's just not how the reality is. So, and it's actually backed up by research. Again, we want to do business with people that we like. And we like people that are not robots. We like people that are humans. So you should not worry too much about if things don't come out the exact same way as you planned them.
Yeah, and I think that's a great message to send out there as well. So we've been talking about stress, and that is a common challenge when it comes to negotiations. Do you think there are any other typical challenges that people might come across?
Yes, definitely. So a lot of them are obviously a byproduct of stress, but I think, one challenge is that negotiations can just drag out a long time because we don't know what we should do and we are stressed about it. So one example that jumps to my mind is union negotiations. So I'm not sure if you have heard about. So last year, for example, so union negotiations are probably more important than ever before, because with rising cost of living and economic challenges, organizations need to make sure that their people are compensated in a fair way, that they are motivated to go to work and wake up in the morning, and that they are motivated to go above and beyond. And, with current inflation, obviously, those contracts need to increase, and there's this challenge between the business and the union. And I'm not sure, have you followed last year in the US, there was this huge union negotiations between the Union Auto Workers Union and the big three automakers. So I think that's Ford, General Motors, and one more. Have you seen that at all? And it sort of dragged out for weeks, no?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, so what happened there is those negotiations, they dragged out for 6 weeks and cost the economy millions and millions of dollars. And what happened is basically both parties used a concept from negotiating called anchoring. And anchoring means that we usually put more tendency on the first piece of information that we encounter. And in a negotiation, how that works is, the idea is, if you can throw that first anchor, if you can make that first offer, that's an opportunity for you to set the terms and determine the tone of the negotiation going forward. The important thing, though, is you have to do that in a reasonable manner. What happened there is General Motors, the union, proposed that they would want for their people a 46% pay increase. It's amazing, right? Imagine you're getting half on top of you currently earn. Over 4 years though, but in 4 years. And I think even to some degree a 4-day working week. So amazing. I'd love it, but it's also kind of obvious that this is just not reasonable, right? And there's just no way you can get to that. And then the automakers on the other side, so Ford proposed, we can't do that, but we can give you a 9% increase over 4 years. So extreme anchor on the other side, and you had that 37% discrepancy, right? So of course it's going to take a lot of time to come together, because how are you going to close that gap? Well, we want 50% more, we can only give you 10% more, but it's going to take ages, and it did. And that is partly due to the fact probably that anchoring hasn't been applied in the right way, and maybe because no one has been again taught how to use anchoring, and it's just used that concept that can work, but in a very extreme way, and probably partly also influenced by stress, right? There is big challenges. Well, if we can't not come to an agreement, then there's going to be the possibility of a strike, and our people won't earn any money, and it's stressful for people. And through all that stressfulness, those kind of anchors and this kind of situation evolves, and then it backfires because it takes way longer to solve the problem. So eventually, after 6 weeks, they agreed on a 25% wage increase over 4 years. But by the time, the strikes had already happened, and it cost the economy millions of money. And that's not only it, it's just stressful for people. There's uncertainty. They want to know what they earn going forward, how they can provide for their families. So this is an example how, that whole stressfulness and not really knowing how to apply behavioral insights in negotiation can become a problem. And by doing it on the other side and applying it in the right way, you can come to a faster outcome and to a quicker outcome, which is beneficial for everyone.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting situation. And I'd love to know what are some key behavioral insights we should all be aware of so we can develop our awareness around negotiations.
Yes. So obviously just mentioned anchoring, right? The important thing with anchoring, though, is to use it in the right way, as I said. So there's some do's and don'ts. Anchoring can be a powerful behavioral tool, but you should use it moderately. You should be able to justify the number you come up with. So those 40%, 47%, for example, that Uni came up with, why is that? Why 47%? If you can't justify it, then it sends a very different signal, which is, we are not taking this seriously, right? And once you set that anchor, you should be firm on it. And that kind of ties to the first point, which if you set a moderate anchor that you can justify, of course you can be firm on it because there's reasoning behind. And I can give you another example. We talked about politicians and how we follow how politicians negotiate. So in 2017, Trump was set to meet the Mexican president. And they were going to talk about who pays for the wall that they were building at that time. And one day before the meeting, Trump twittered that there would be no way that the US would pay a single cent for that wall, and it would all have to be paid by Mexico. Now, that's one day before the actual meeting. What do you think happened after that?
Oh, I feel like that would have not gone very well at all.
Yeah, actually, you're right. It did not even happen. The Mexican president canceled on him.
Oh, wow.
And that's a great example how anchoring can backfire. Basically, what Trump did, it's almost like that 47% offer, but even more extreme. He throws out the anchor to set the term and determine the tone of the negotiation on the next day. And it set a very different anchor, which is, well, I'm not taking this seriously anyways. And the Mexican president just said, well, there's no point in meeting if, this is sort of the foundation of our conversation. Mm-hmm. So that's an example how anchoring can backfire. But if you use it in the right way, it's great. So, not justify a number and use it moderately. And by the way, also don't round up and down. So when you think about selling your house, what we often see is people rounding up or down the selling price. So say, they're selling a property, they look at the square meter price in their area, and that times the amount of square meters that their property ends up to something like, just hypothetically, whatever, 789,534. And what they do then is they just round up to 800,000, or they even round down to say 780,000, right? I would argue don't do that, because that sends the signal that you just made up an arbitrary number, more or less, based on what you would like for that house. If you keep the exact number, you're actually able to justify. You can say, well, I looked at the property prices and the square meter price in my area. I multiplied that by, the amount of our square meters, plus there's more value because of this and that. So you're actually able to justify it. So that's another tip, like keep the precise number, don't draw an up and down. Some other behavioral tools are, I think one big one is just being aware of confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is that concept that we walk through the world and we interpret information in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs. So here's an example. You drive through Melbourne, and I'm just making this up, right? And you have a pre-existing belief that all Asian women are bad drivers. And as you cruise along, a car pulls out of their driveway and you have to, brake hard. And as you drive by, you see, oh, it's an Asian woman. And you're like, I knew it. All Asian women are bad drivers. And you put that into your memory together with the 2 other times that has ever happened in your whole life. Meanwhile, disregarding the 30 times that a white van driver has pulled up in front of you and then you had to brake hard as well. But that's because your pre-existing belief is a different one, right? And that white van driver might have a pre-existing belief, again, just make this up, that all Muslims are terrorists. And that's because when he ever reads the word Muslim, it's in a newspaper on 100 font red writing when there was a terrorist attack by a Muslim. But meanwhile, he disregards that actually far more terrorist attacks are carried out by non-Muslims against Muslims. And that's, again, because he has that pre-existing belief. So that's what confirmation bias is. And the same is true for when you go into negotiation as well. You might go into negotiation and you might have a pre-existing belief about that other party you negotiate with. And you should be aware of this, because that can really hinder your negotiation. It can hinder your possibility to listen to the other party, to question the other party, to be transparent. You know, if you negotiate with a CEO and you have the pre-existing belief that he is just a money-hungry person and, you know, he does not care about people, then the negotiation is looking very different than if you would have an unbiased view on negotiating with a person. So I think that's another big one, where just being aware of our confirmation bias can make a big difference.
Yeah, interesting. And that's something that would be hard to control as well. And I feel like a lot of us walk around with our confirmation biases and we don't even realize when we see something, we're already thinking like a certain thing about that thing or that object or that person. So how can we be more aware of, for example, confirmation bias?
Yes, so unfortunately, kind of already touched upon it. Awareness is not everything, right? We can be well aware of all our biases, including confirmation bias, but inherently they're so wired into our brains that we cannot just get rid of it, so to say. But what we can do is just use some techniques to hopefully mitigate that. So one negotiation technique, or in general just a conversation technique, I'd say, is called yes and it's a concept from improv. Have you heard of that?
It sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea is, no matter what the other party says to you, you build upon what they say with yes and, rather than yes but. And that is just a way to steer the conversation from a negative direction, which would be, you know, yes, but I want this, to a positive one. And it's also sort of indirectly a way to reduce your confirmation bias, because you're actually, building upon their thought, what they say, and you're not sort of building upon what you think and what your pre-existing belief is. So, you know, that's a great way. And, you know, an example is, for example, the other party says, yes, you know, we love your product, but it is just way too expensive. Yes, and that's because we put a lot of money in R&D. Now, that's very different to saying, yes, but, you know, we put a lot of money in R&D and that's why it's so expensive. Like, you know, why don't you understand that? It's just like steering it in a positive way. It's taking what the other party says and building upon it. I think that's just a great way to almost fight a bit of your own confirmation bias and just take, you know, what the other party says and then build upon it. Maybe another thing is, you know, another technique now that we're here is just generally not having the feeling. So in a negotiation, what many people think is that the more you give away of information, the worse. It's almost like the Miranda rights, right? If you get arrested, they say everything you're gonna say can and will be used against you, and people are almost acting like that in negotiations. Well, it's actually not. You have to answer along with questioning in order to find out, again, what the other party wants and how to give them what they want. And they need to know what you want. So you need to give away that information, and you need to give away and you need to answer questions. So, yes.
Great. So I'd love to ask you about some hands-on techniques that you'd recommend to get a better outcome in negotiation.
Sure. Three that pop to my mind. So one is called make the other side's case. And it really comes from, so for example, in my case, when I was a 3-year-old, my dad told me I just loved being in the swimming pool. And, you know, he always had a very hard time negotiating with me how to get out of the swimming pool. And the technique that he used was, he kind of made my case. And he said, look, I would love to stay in the swimming pool as well for the whole day. but I know mom's at home and she's already cooking dinner. And if we don't go now, then she's going to be upset. And then probably the dinner is going to take longer and you're going to get food later. And then you're going to be upset. And that way, we all going to be upset. And, it would be much better if we leave now and then we have dinner early and we're all happy. And apparently it worked. And I think what holds with 3-year-olds holds with CEOs and executives as well, and in those tough negotiations as well. If you find a way to make the other side's case and build upon it, that's really powerful because it gives the other party the feeling that you actually understand what they're saying and you understand where they're coming from. But you should not stop there. You should then build upon it. It's kind of like my dad said, right? I would love to stay here as well. But, if we don't go now, then mom's going to be upset. So that, you have to build upon it. So I think that's a great technique to just acknowledge that you have listened to the other party, repeat what they say, and then reason why you think it's good to do whatever you think is the right thing.
Yeah, I love that. That's so cool because when we think about like concepts like negotiation, we feel like there has to be some really complex, intricate sort of strategy to use or technique to use. But like you said, it can be something really simple as long as it works with the other person.
Yeah, exactly. It is simple things. And that's really because, we always have that stereotype of we need to act tough and we shouldn't give away too much information and we should not ask too much. But it's actually not the case. It's sort of bringing us to another hands-on technique, which is as simple as active listening and powerful questioning. If you are not listening to what the other party wants, you cannot give them what they want. And in order to listen what the other party wants, you need to ask questions as well. It's kind of, I don't know if you heard about that concept of appreciative inquiry, which is, okay, let's find out together what's going well, like how we can get to the outcome we want. And for that, we just need to talk. So you can give away information and you can, listen to the other party and make some compromises. And you actually not only can, you have to do that because if you don't give the other party what they want, you can't get what you want. It's actually a cool story. So let me try getting this right. I read about this quite recently, but it's the story of two sisters. And the mom said, okay, go out to the market and buy a bag of oranges, please. So they went out to the market. They bought a bag of oranges. And on the way back, they already, ate most of those oranges because they were just delicious. And then there was just one orange left. Now, with that one orange left, they started negotiating who gets the orange. And, they just could not come to an agreement. They were like, okay, let's do maybe half-half. No, but you already had more. And it just dragged out for a long time. So the mom said, okay, stop. I'll send you guys to grandma. And she's a very wise woman. And she's going to figure that out to you. So when grandma was there with the two sisters, she actually encouraged them to ask the other person questions. Why would they like that orange? What do they want to do with it? And to listen to the other party. And what they found out through that powerful questioning and active listening, that one of the sisters wanted the zest of the orange to bake a cake, while the other sister wanted the flesh of the orange to make some orange juice. So by questioning each other and by listening to each other, they actually created that extra value, that pie, so to say, which they could then split, and they had that win-win outcome. Yeah. And that's what, I think this concept, again, of just active listening and powerful questioning shows. If you don't do it, you might actually not come to a win-win agreement because you don't find out what the other party wants. If you don't do that, you cannot create that extra value, that pie that you can then split. And that's the whole idea of negotiating.
Yeah, that's really interesting as well, because you always think that everyone's in competition with everyone and everyone wants what you want, and that's not always the case. And like your example just said, you might want the overall same thing, but might want different parts of that to make a whole. So that's really cool.
Exactly.
Yeah, awesome. And did you say you had a third one as well?
I got a third one, which is, I guess, like more like, well, actually, it's just another one that just jumps to my mind, which is called fight fire with water. So,
Okay.
we talked a lot about negotiations and sort of the ideal scenarios, but I think we also need to acknowledge that there can be certain negotiations that can get a little bit tense and can get maybe a little bit heated, and maybe you're in that stalemate situation, which, for example, happened in the union negotiations that we talked about. But in that case, I think it's just important to remember that there's no point, if you encounter fire from the other party, there's no point in replying with fire and stirring it up even more, because you're even more likely to end up in a stalemate situation. And then there's no win for anyone. Yeah. So a great way to get it back on and set the terms again, I think, is using humor. And just replying in a way that makes you human again and like brings the conversation on a human level. So think about you sell a house and it's listed for $1 million. Now someone comes in and say, hey, I'm gonna give you $400,000 for it. Kind of an extreme anchor, right? Of course you could just say, well, just go away, leave me alone. But you can also just apply a bit humor and, say something like, oh, why don't we do 300,000? Would that be fine for you? And it's like, kind of get the idea. It's just, that's just like a nice example. There can be like way more tricky situations where you're already in negotiation for weeks, but like replying with a bit of humor, like getting it back on equal terms and actually agreeing with the other person or with the other party that, hey, we are here to solve the same problem. If you and I come together and we find a solution and we come to an agreement, we can both win. Like, what's that pie that we create? Let's identify it. And the rest really becomes a data exercise. How much we can offer our people more is, in the end of the day, a data exercise of the current inflation rate, of how the business is doing, of what's feasible. But we should agree first and get the contentious part out of the way, that we have the same goal of making our people happy, getting them to work motivated. And that's sort of, the idea of there's no point of fighting fire with fire. Use water, get the contentious part out of the way, and you're going to get to an agreement much quicker and to a better outcome.
Yeah. Amazing. And thank you so much for sharing that. There's so many like tips and tricks that we're learning here. So I'd love to transition into our practices and habits and just hone in a bit more on some strategies that are a bit more specific to managing stress before, during, and after negotiations. Do you have a practice or maybe a few practices that you could recommend for this?
Yes, definitely. Now, I should first say, with those practices, like the important thing is that I'm now sharing what works for me, but that might be very different what works for you, right? So it's important that everyone sort of finds out what's working for them. But from my perspective, what really has helped me, and that's true with public speaking or negotiating, is things like breath work and meditation. So in particular, breath work is something that you can actually do, for example, in a room before entering a negotiation with your boss without even anyone realizing. Maybe they see you with the eyes closed and, you seem to breathe in a bit of, strange way, but that does not matter. I think it's a great way without anyone realizing, just before that moment of entering negotiation, to calm your mind, get out of your head, into your body and calm. And so I can give an example if you'd like of an actual breathwork exercise. So one that I use that's very easy is, imagine you're breathing in a square, and each square has 3 seconds. So you do a 3-second inhale through the nose, then you hold for 3 seconds, and then you do a 3-second exhale through the mouth, like kind of blowing out a candle. And then you hold again. So would you like to do it? One round?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. So 3-second inhale through the nose, hold for 3 seconds, and exhale. All right, let's start. Inhale through the nose.
Okay.
1, 2, 3. Now hold for 3 seconds. And blowing out through the mouth like blowing out a candle. And then you hold again. So probably, some of the listeners there think like, what is going on here? But I encourage you, give it a try, and it really makes a difference. Try to breathe into your belly. It's called diaphragmatic breathing, into your belly, and then again out like blowing out a candle. Close your eyes. And this is just something that's helped me, for example. What goes well together with breath work is also cold water. So this can be things like a cold shower, all the way to, I know this is like a bit of a trend now, ice baths. But the general idea is, maybe cold water is not for you, even though I encourage you to try it. Maybe for you, it's just getting out in nature. Like, I think the real point here is getting out of your head inside your body. Maybe it's just doing 20 squats before, you enter the car seller to buy your next car, negotiate about that. Or, maybe maybe it's the meditation, maybe it's the breath, or maybe you sit in front of the park in the office before you enter the salary negotiation. It's just, how can you get out of your mind and into your body? And for me, breath work and cold water work very well as exercise is just also a great way to do before negotiation, or for that matter, public speaking.
Yeah. And even when we were doing like the little exercise just then, I noticed that because there are like steps to it, you're focusing on what you're doing as opposed to the thoughts in your head. So it's really a moment to just think about something else other than like the thoughts constantly running in your head.
Exactly. And I think that's the whole point of it. And, don't think what other people think. If it helps you, I've seen people warming up their jaw and like yawning and whatever before they actually go on stage and present. And in the end of the day, you just find like your little routine. And if it helps you, then that's great.
Yeah, definitely. Because sometimes you see people and they're doing some strange things and you're like, oh, that's a bit weird. I wonder why they're doing that. But then it works for them. So I feel like even if it's a bit weird or strange, if it works for you, then why stop?
Exactly. Was it Taylor Swift or someone else that always takes a shot of tequila before entering the stage? Now, I would probably not recommend that before entering a salary negotiation with your boss. And I would also probably not recommend doing, for example, the ice baths just before. But whatever works for you, I guess. If the shot of tequila helps Taylor Swift to do a better show and to loosen up her nerves, then why not?
Yeah, if it works for you and you're being safe, we should preface be safe. Be sure
100%,
you're doing the right
good
thing.
Point.
Yeah, no, but I love that. And how do you recommend people find what works for them?
Just trying. So that's how I, for example, found that I really benefit from ice baths, because there was a guy when I was still living in Coogee, and he'd come every Wednesday, I think at 6 a.m. and brings those tubs and does ice baths. And he just said, would you like to jump in and try it? And I loved it. And he does the breath work as well. So I guess just try it. Just listen to your body. Otherwise, you're not gonna find out. And I can tell you a lot of things what works for me, but again, it might not work for you. So that's why I think just try.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like it could be easy to get discouraged when you try something or you try 2 or 3 things and it's still not working for you. So what's your advice for people when they're trying to find what works for them, but they're kind of hitting roadblocks on the way? They haven't found that thing yet.
Yeah, I think it's just the mindset shouldn't be, okay, like I have to find that silver bullet. It's like almost like maybe the process, like the way is the goal in that sense. It's unlikely that it's going to be, oh, you found that one exercise and suddenly you're a better negotiator, right? It's more like, it's just part of the process. And maybe even you doing the process can calm your mind in a way that you just, the mindset should probably be, well, I'm doing something to improve my negotiating skills or my public speaking skills or just being less stressed. And that hopefully by nature already calms you down a bit because you're actually trying something. And again, it's not going to be the one silver bullet that then suddenly makes you a better negotiator. But through that process, you're going to pick up little things. For example, the breathwork is actually like a whole routine, right? And I just picked up the 3-second square piece because I can remember it, frankly. And it's an easy way. So it's just like little parts of it that might even help you. And in any way, it's not going to make things worse, right? If only you can get benefit from it.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to put it. So thank you, Max, for sharing those insights with us. This brings us to our last section for today, which is our open mic. So as you know, this is just a space for you to talk about whatever you'd like. I remember last time we talked about van life. So yeah, the floor is yours.
Yeah, well, again, heaps of things. Obviously, van life, did some new trips. I guess I mentioned at the beginning, like I really love the ocean. So, any kind of ocean activity, including spearfishing, is actually something I picked up here in Australia, which I think I'm quite passionate about. And, it's not really the spearfishing part itself. I think it's being able to know where your food comes from and finding a way to sort of getting the supply chain in between out of it and actually understanding what it takes to get food into the supermarket has just been something that's been quite eye-opening for me. So I'm not sure what you do. Do you like any fishing, or do you even eat fish?
I'm a vegetarian, unfortunately. I was a pescatarian a while ago, but yeah, now I don't eat fish at all. But I think that's really interesting because there's obviously this huge supply chain and this huge chain that food goes through to get to you, whether that's from the farm to like the supermarket or wherever it's coming from. But sort of eliminating all that in between and just having like person to food is really cool.
Yeah, and I think in our days, again, as life gets quicker and quicker and we're not really feeling the rising temperature, right? There's actually an interesting book I'm just reading. It's called A Monk's Guide to Happiness by Geelong Tupton. And he talks about how he was living that fast-paced life. And then one day, he burned out and he actually went into a meditation retreat. And that meditation retreat ended up taking 4 years, which is quite crazy if you think about it. And like large parts of it, he was not even allowed to talk. Anyways, he said when he came out into the normal world, he realized how things sped up and how we're living that fast-paced life now and everything fast. In our diaries, there's back-to-back meetings, our calendars are full. And we're not having sort of felt the temperature rising, but he obviously being away for 4 years and then coming back has felt that. And I think that's a great point because we're getting more and more busy. We're jumping into the supermarket. We're just picking up food or ordering HelloFresh, which I think is still great, but we are losing that connection of where our food comes from and what it takes to get it into the supermarket shelves. And that's where spearfishing, even though I'm not a good spearfisher, I should also say, really helps you just open your eyes and be a little bit more conscious about that. And then that translates to maybe you want to grow your own tomatoes in the garden or your own zucchini and that sort of thing. So that's something I've been trying to do more. And yeah, pretty a lot of passionate about it. And it's something you can combine great with van life as well, because you all those amazing beaches.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that whole idea of like connecting to the process is something that's really interesting. And I feel like there's so many different things emerging these days to help people connect with the process or connect with life in a more deeper way. Like, for example, silent retreats or like different retreats that exist out there that get you separated from like your phone and your device, or things that come to you instantly, and it makes you work harder for certain things and to see different perspectives as well.
Yeah, such a great point. Love that. Yeah, it's it's a bit hard, right? Because again, like, because we live in that life, it's sort of life's getting faster and faster, and we're not really realizing it. But I guess once you're out, like, you long for 4 years and then come back, you realize it. That's why things like breath work and cold water are great, or just listening to a long podcast like this one, because it's a bit of a pendulum to the fast life, and you can consciously slow down a bit.
Definitely. I totally agree with everything you've said. And I feel like it's so important to remind people to get more in touch with like different processes as opposed to just like the end goal, because we're so focused on like, how can we get from A to B without considering like the journey or the, path that we have to go through to get there. And there are all these different little things that we can try to make that easier, make things more manageable as well.
Love it.
Awesome. Well, I think that brings us to the end of today's episode. So thank you so much, Max, for coming on the show and chatting to us again.
Thanks, Joanna, for having me. Really enjoyed it. And yeah, thanks for all the interesting questions.
Yeah, of course. Now, for those of us who want to find out a bit more about you and your work, where can we go?
Yeah, great place is always LinkedIn, Max Reisner. You should find me there. My website, decisionscience.com.au. You find information about the kind of work I'm doing, about the kind of masterclasses and courses, also about negotiating that I'm running. So yeah, if there's anything you'd like to know more or just brainstorm or any questions, just feel free to send me an email or message on LinkedIn.
Brilliant. Well, we've also got Max's details down in the description below if you missed that, but thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks, Joanna.
You have been listening to Work in Progress, the Personal Productivity Science Insights podcast produced by the Life Management Science Labs. Listen to episodes from LMSL's 10 Life Management Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or other podcasting apps on your smartphone. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it and us grow to bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website, pp.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Joanna. Thanks for tuning in.